And now we come to some guy named Jeff. I'm not sure who he is, but he's sitting up here thinking he gets to speak. We didn't put a time limit on him. I'm sorry. But I will say this. I've been on the board for a few years. I had the pleasure of being on the committee that searched for a new president and CEO when Rick was retiring. And we chose Jeff. And it, without a doubt in my mind, the single best decision I've ever made as being a part of Volunteer Corporate is making him president and CEO. So it's always the highlight of this meeting, Jeff.
Good afternoon. 2 years in a row back in person. This feels good. I love it when the officers and Brian get up here and give their presentations, and it ties in unknowingly to some key words that are in mine, or synonymous points, like Brian when he talked about praying and anointing over those who are anxious or in need of something, and that's going to tie in momentarily to the whole theme of my presentation this year. He didn't know that. And then John using words like health and opportunities, which he didn't know are key words in my presentation as well. Another word he mentioned that ties in to my intro was short, which was that this year I intended to make my presentation shorter. It didn't work. Once I started putting all the ideas down on paper, I realized this might actually be longer, but at least I tried. So I do want to start off, though, with jumping into a quick look back, previous years since I've been in this role. The topics or themes of my presentations in 2016, it was the where. Where is Volcor now and where are we headed? And then 2017, it was the what and the why. What do we do and why? 2018, the how and the when. So how do we do it? When do we do it? I talked about the song Dream Small and how seemingly small things are so big to the members, and how we recognize that the things we do to support you that seem small on a daily basis are so big to your members, and that's not lost on us. 2019, I talked about momentum. We just come off of a couple of really strong years, and we were starting to really get some momentum towards better defining the part from 2016 about where Volcor is going. And who knew that we would need that momentum as we started to work on foundational strength the next year, and how critical both the momentum and the foundational strength would be when the pandemic hit, as we chose to keep our feet moving, which we talked about last year when we talked about turning headwinds into tailwinds. So that's kind of how we've gotten to where we are. And then 2022's theme, which I teased a minute ago, I'll tell you. But first, a little bit of the state of the corporate. They've given some numbers, so I'm not going to stay here long, but I do want to give a little bit of a real-time snapshot on where these numbers are, because we do continue to see AME distributions coming from U.S. Central. So 12/31/20, and I'm going to jump from there to compare to 7/31/22 to give you real time. Tier 1 capital went from $102 million to $137. Part of that, of course, was organic earnings, but a significant piece of that was the return of our retained earnings that we charged off when U.S. Central had their charge-offs. Retained earnings from 34.8 to 69.8. Assets, $1.34 billion. Quick pit stop to the end of last year, $2.4 billion down to $1.8 billion, and I'll go over that in a moment. Assets under management, $2.5 billion to $5.3. I discussed the difference last year and what the assets and the assets under management are. The Tier 1 ratio from 8.12% down to 4.72%, up to 6.08. So you can see that that's recovering nicely. And the retained earnings ratio sits at 3.13. So some of the significant contributors to the odd shape of those numbers, the strategic desire last 2 years to simply keep our feet moving, the creation of Symphony, not slowing down and hunkering down as we could have during the pandemic, but continuing to push forward with an eye more on 5 years from now being what you need us to be instead of worrying about maximizing earnings the last 2 years. So we created Symphony, invested in that. I'm happy to report that Symphony is on the verge of break even after just a year and a half of being in business, which is pretty awesome. Christina, who serves as our Chief Experience Officer, our other CEO, is also the president and CEO of Symphony. And so that has taken off really, really well, which is not a surprise because it was a creation as a direct byproduct of your feedback. What's missing? What do you need? And they've been able to offer services, correct me if I misspeak on any of this data, offer services to credit unions as small as 12 million in assets to as large as a non-member credit union of over 5 billion in assets. So the product line is something that can truly be of value to any credit union. There we go. I'm going to find it eventually. The asset management estate distributions, which we've already touched on. I will say to date, the distributions we've received, 45.4 million, with more to come, as well, with more expected to come. All indications are, I gave Justin a mild heart attack when I made that sound definitive, I think. And then the distribution that we made to West Virginia and Kentucky credit unions, 15 million at the end of last year. Asset and asset attrition, that's why some of these numbers look so peculiar in terms of capital ratios, 8.12 to 4.72 to 6.08. You all experienced major asset inflation with government distributions, the aid checks that were received by many. A lot of that flowed to us. We expected a little over a year ago, we started forecasting for that money to start running off. We were right that it would, about a year off on our timing. It finally started to come off around March, April, that time period. So you see the significant dilution in our capital ratios, but you see it's also started to pop nicely as assets have started to normalize. And then lastly, it's just slow. Interest rate margin relief. As rates compressed all the way back down to zero, that squeezes us mightily. We don't have mortgage loans and auto loans and those types of things. We have a heavily variable balance sheet. So when rates go to zero, our margin goes with it. So as rates have started to move back up, it gives us a little bit of room to breathe. So you'll start to see that reflected in an increase in earnings. So, whoops. We're going to figure out how to get along before this is over. So moving forward, though, lately there have been two key buzzwords, one of which I just showed you, that have been just a recurring theme in different things I've read or heard. And one is city, and the other is hope. Which is interesting because where they're coming from, I was reading a book called 16 Stones by Dick Wells. And it's a leadership book. But it's a leadership book that's based on the book of Nehemiah and how he rebuilt or helped led the rebuilding of the wall around Jerusalem and provided the city hope and peace and protection. And then a couple of months ago in June, when our pastor was on sabbatical, one of our staff pastors filled in and spoke, and her name is Annie F. Downs, and she talked about how our growing city is a blessing to others. She was talking about Nashville and how it's growing and continues to bless others around the country. And then our senior pastor returned, and 2 weeks ago, Kevin talked about how God was wanting to transform the lives of our cities. So all this just keeps recurring. I keep city, city, city. So I started trying to figure out what does this all mean. When Annie kept talking, in her message, she talked about how Nashville is an exporting part of the country, how we export thoughts and ideas from the universities, innovation from the medical community, the creative arts, factories manufacturing and sending out products and goods. Then her point in all that was actually, what if we got to be a part of exporting the gospel, which I thought was pretty cool. But that's what got me thinking. That's what triggered something. Because it occurred to me at that point, everybody's exporting something. So what are we exporting? Credit unions are exporters of hope for so many when they need it most. That's what credit unions export. So for me, I'm going to talk about the city, and my spin on it, though, is not a city on a map like it was for Annie. It's more anywhere that we can create and export hope. And what is your city? you have multiple cities. Is it your home, your neighborhood, the ball fields, school? One I know for sure is your credit union. Another is Volcor. Those are cities. Those are exporters of hope. And all of our cities have been through an awful lot the last 2 years, right? The pandemic, staffing with the Great Resignation, regulatory expectations, member expectations. You recall last year I talked about how we're all in the same storm, but not the same boat. Some of our members need us to just throw them a raft. Some of them need us to be what we've not been yet because they're just cruising right ahead. So we've got to be multiple different things. So member expectations, asset growth, but also the growth and the evolution of our organizations, culture, perception, engagement. What does that look like? How do we prosper in that regard? One thing she said that was cool, though, was we must work for the peace and prosperity of our city. Revival is from the inside out. I thought that was pretty neat. That got me to thinking about something I don't think I've shared in this setting before. I know I've shared it with the board. I know I've shared it with staff. And I refer to it as the priority waterfall. And two misnomers in business. And one of them is that we always say our people are our most important asset. And as I sit here with half of Volcor staff in here, you have to hear the whole thing and don't get caught on the next line, which is I disagree. Our people are not our most important asset. Trust is our most important asset. Because if we don't have the trust of our people, we don't have our people. The flip side of that, old CFO, so I'm going to use a balance sheet. Go to the other side of the balance sheet, lack of trust can be our most expensive liability. So I see trust as our most important asset. But then how do you continue to create that revival from the inside out? Well, the priority waterfall is pretty simple, even though it makes examiners cringe when I say it. Our top priority is our people. Our second priority is our members. And our third priority is our financial performance. Because if we take care of our people, that cascades down to taking care of our members, and that organically cascades down to our financial performance. So I refer to that as the priority waterfall. To me, that's how exporters of hope can ensure that the revival is from the inside out after 2 years of what we've all experienced together. And when you think about how important that is, I loved when I found this. Proverbs 11:11. When right living people bless a city, it flourishes. So think about your city. Think about the people. Think about how you create that revival. Think about how you care for your staff, how you build that trust, how you prioritize them. Or if your city is outside the credit union, if you're thinking of home, the ball fields, wherever it may be, how do you create that as one of those right living people that can empower that city to flourish? Something else Annie said that was really, really great. One day I'm going to have to tell her I quoted her a lot in one of my presentations. Was what if we're living in the middle of answered prayers of people who were praying for our city 20, 50, or even 100 years ago? Or what if you are the one who can say in 30, 40, or 50 years, I was there when God did that? Think about that. We're in the middle of something that looking back 30 years from now, we might be able to say, you know what, I was a part of the revival of that city. I contributed to that. And what does that look like? What might that look like? If that doesn't inspire you, we need to talk after this. So what could that mean for your city? What could it mean for your credit union? How do you emerge from COVID? How do you gather the troops or inspire the team? How do you figure out what the next right step may be? One thing that we had pounded into our brains in grad school, now more than a few years ago, was never waste a good crisis. There's always value in a crisis. It may be hard to acknowledge in the moment, but never waste a good crisis. Use it. A good buddy of mine that I do a small group with sent me something the other day that kind of said the same thing. Suffering produces endurance. Endurance produces character. Character produces hope. Until we learn to suffer well, we might not learn to rejoice well. I thought that was pretty cool if you think about that. It's never waste a crisis. So I started thinking about the fact that if every crisis has value, if every hardship has value, then how do you leverage that? How do you take that first step towards turning something that seems so much like a setback and really make it into a step forward? And it occurred to me that life is really a series of opportunities, and it's what we do with them that matters. There we go. It went too quick. So, just a little personal example of that over the last couple of years. 2 years ago, my daughter decided she was going to retire from gymnastics. She was the 4th-ranked gymnast in the state in her division. She was a good gymnast. My wife was a competitive gymnast. I was a soccer player. So when I told Morgan she wanted to retire from, when Morgan told me she wanted to retire from gymnastics and play soccer, I told her she was telling mommy. I wasn't. So she decides she wants to play. She gets invited to try out for a club team, which I thought was pretty cool because she'd never played before, and made it. Played 2 games, and along came COVID. Shut everything down. She was crushed. So we can be crushed, or we can say, well, hey, Daddy's played ball for 40 years. We embrace the opportunity for me to give her her start in the sport and start training her over the next however long it took for soccer to resume. And then she ended up, soccer resumed, she did well, made it up to the next team. And this past year I was asked if I would be interested in being an assistant coach with her coach, Coach Kia. And of course I was all over that. I love that. I'm there eating it up just watching. Now I get to actually participate. And this past spring, we worked on teaching the girls more than just how to play ball. We started teaching them what it means to set big goals and then create stair-step goals to get there. How do we decide what that big goal should be? The big goal was to get to Dallas. Dallas is where the regional tournament is. You have to win the state championship in order to qualify. So they wanted to get to Dallas. So every week we gathered from the girls, what's your goal today? What's today's goal for today's game that's going to get you one step closer to contributing to the team getting one step closer to Dallas? We made it all the way to the state championship. Lost 2-1 to Chattanooga, who we get a rematch against in September. But lost 2-1. These girls worked so hard all spring, fell 1 goal short of their goal of making it to Dallas. As they were walking off the field, most of them in tears, Kia and I are just grabbing them in clumps, hugging them, just loving on them, and starting to think about, what do we do in this moment? What's the right thing to say? And with these girls, it was really clear their hearts were in it. So we took that opportunity to explain to them, this isn't a setback. It's a new benchmark. It's a new floor. So what are these girls doing now? They worked hard all summer. We just reconvened for season a couple of weeks ago. They're driven. They're focused. They're writing down goals and giving them to me. They figured out how to do more than just learn how to play soccer. They turned a setback into a huge step forward. That's really, really rewarding and cool to see. So sometimes what looks like a setback really doesn't have to be. Another really interesting example that just hit me earlier, if I'd have thought about it, I would have had a slide, but it would have given way to heart attack if I'd have changed it right before the meeting started. Was Tammy and I are about to experience our 15th anniversary at the end of this month. And we got married on the beach. It was supposed to be a 7 p.m. sunset wedding when we were both living out in Southern California. And at 6:30, 30 minutes before the wedding, when we were about to go from the condo we were staying in that a friend of hers had gifted to us for the week down to our wedding site, we got a phone call that the valet service was dropping off all of our guests at the wrong beach. Yeah. Sunset wedding. The sun doesn't wait for you to gather your guests. And that was our light source. So panic set in. We ended up having a 7:30 sunset wedding on the beach with the most miraculous photos you've ever seen. And so I've many times since then, I've used analogies with other folks when they had other things that had nothing to do with weddings going on. And I've just said, hey, it's going to be like a wedding. It's not going to be exactly how you planned it, because whose wedding ever goes off exactly how you planned it? But it's going to be perfect. And so sometimes we have setbacks, we have opportunities that are dressed as opportunities. Other times we have opportunities that are dressed or disguised as setbacks. We have to turn them into opportunities. The difference is in these two, one requires intentional action. The other one just requires you to pay attention. Sometimes God will do the heavy lifting for you. You just have to go along for the ride. So we emerge as our community's exporters of hope. Excuse me. And at Volcor, at the onset of COVID, we made a very conscious decision to use the pandemic to focus on how we would emerge from it. From day one, we made a decision we were going to come out of this thing stronger than we went into it. We weren't sure exactly what that was going to look like, but we knew we weren't going to waste a good crisis. So we wanted to emerge as a new, improved, bolder version of ourselves. But we had to figure out what the next right step was. As credit unions, as parents, as people in general, we're all called to do the next right thing, not because of the impact it has on us necessarily, but because of the impact that it has on those we serve. Thinking about the book of Jonah, he was called to Nineveh. So what did he do? He promptly jumped on a ship to Tarshish, the exact opposite direction. Try saying Tarshish. Try saying it 2 times in a row, much less 5. And we all know the story. Big belly of, when we were kids, it was a whale. Big belly of a big fish. As my pastor put it comically a couple weeks ago, God used a big fish as an Uber to get Jonah where he wanted him. But when he got there to do what he was called to do, he realized that the next right thing for him was actually the last thing God had asked him to do. And as a result of that, 125,000 people, an entire city was saved. Not because God loved Jonah, but because God loved Nineveh. And so, what does that look like for us? What does that look like in Credit Union Land? What does that look like in our city? For you, as natural person credit unions, and for us, but specifically in this case for you all, COVID was hard on a lot of folks. COVID was hard on your members. You see those stories. You live those stories every day. We hear them from you, but you're in them every day. You're well aware of how hard COVID was, but you met them right where they were, right where they needed them, with arms wide open. And don't worry, I'm not about to quote Creed, for those who know who Creed is. I got a laugh out of James. So you met them with arms wide open right where they were. And that was part of what was missing from my presentation. Nothing better than being a planner like I am and having things hit you today that need to go into your presentation and you're scrambling to fix it. But on the way to the golf tournament this morning, I heard the song that I am going to quote that's not Creed. And it's by Matthew West. It says, "Me on Your Mind." And that's when it hit me. That's how you all embraced your members. He says, "Just knowing you're mindful of me, just knowing you call me your child, it's flooding my soul with unspeakable hope. Thank you, Lord, that it's me on your mind. Who am I that the King of the world would give one single thought about my broken heart? Who am I that the God of all grace wipes the tears from my face and says, 'Come as you are'?" That's what you are as exporters of hope, as natural persons credit unions. You've always got your member on your mind. You know exactly what they're going through, and you meet them right where they are. And I heard that song this morning. It was like, ding, 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 that's what's missing from what I had prepared. For us, it was the AME distributions. As I mentioned, it was 15 million. We didn't have to do it. We had to jump through a lot of hoops to be able to do it. But it was the right thing to do. It was the only thing to do. And so it was what we did. So we all have a calling on our lives, and it's the calling that gets us through the hard times. Think about the last 2 years of running your shops. It's been the calling to serve your communities, to serve your members. They got you through the hard times of closed branches or closed lobbies, COVID outbreaks amongst your staff, staffing impacts from the Great Resignation. It's been your calling to serve your members that got you through those things. That's what gets us all through the hard times. And rising to that opportunity to make a difference gives us great joy, right? Frederick Buechner said, the place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. To me, that's a credit union. We're called to be exporters of hope to our cities, whatever they may be. And Volcor tries to do that by working diligently as your trusted strategic partner. And as John articulated earlier, Based on member survey feedback, 95% of our credit unions who responded view us that way. That's our goal, not to be just a vendor you do transactional business with, but as someone you desire to do all your business with, to problem solve with, to troubleshoot with, not just to make sure transactions go through. Just like you desire with your members. You don't want to just process a transaction. You want to be their go-to, just as we want to be for you. I love how Kevin Queen put it 2 weeks ago. He said, God doesn't want to be your Google Maps that you turn on or you turn to just when you need turn-by-turn directions. He wants you to experience your life with him. In our circle, Tammy and I, or our circle of friends, we call that doing life together. That's what these relationships with credit unions are about, doing life together, not being their turn-by-turn Google map. So that's what we strive to do at Volcor. We don't just process the transactions for you when you need them. We want to be your partner. We want to be the one you call on speed dial when you need something and you don't know who does it. We want to be you know what? I don't know if Volcor does that. Let me find out. We've been making visits lately trying to get back out, and the overwhelming feedback has been, we're happy with what you do, but we don't know enough about what you do. And then we start talking about things, and you do that? Yes, we do that. Well, we also just did this, or we're getting ready to do it. We do that too. You do? Yes. We're not getting the word to you. We need to do a better job of that. What we want to be as your trusted strategic partner is the first call you make when you decide we need that. Well, does Volcor do it? I don't know. I'm going to find out. So Bob Goff has a great analogy for what I'm describing. But before I explain it to you, I'm going to skip that. Before I explain it to you, I want to show you my COVID evolution of the handshake. This is pre-COVID. Looks pretty normal, right? Normal, pretty familiar. Onset of COVID. That's when things started to get a little bit weird. That's when things got a lot weird. And this is when people started to come out of their shells a little bit. Maybe contact is okay. And now we're getting somewhere. But it's the next one that I love. This is what I found. With the header that said, The Complicated Future of the Handshake. But I want to simplify the handshake for you with what Bob Goff had to say. Bob Goff says a handshake between partners should look more like this. Wrist to wrist. Because when you're hand to hand and one person gets tired or weary or distracted or their hand slips, the connection can be lost. But not when you're wrist to wrist. If you stop shaking hands with people and started going wrist to wrist, even if one lets go or loses grip, you're still safe. His explanation was that that's how God has us. My thinking is, welcome to credit unions. That's how credit unions have our members. That's how Carter's got my back. That's how Kenny's got my back even when I miss a putt on the third hole for his team. And he talks about it all afternoon. Love you, Kenny. But in all seriousness, this to me, when he was explaining that exemplified the credit union relationship. That exemplifies the relationship that we strive to have with you and that we know you strive to have with your members. That's something special because if they get tired or weary or distracted, life throws them a curveball and they start to loosen their grip, you've still got them. And we have you. I want to point out that I won't ask staff to stand because John's already done that, but I just want to point out that this is how all of our staff has you. That's why a year into COVID, people were saying, what, you guys are working from home? Yeah, we've been working from home for a year. I had no idea. Well, that's what we wanted to hear, that you had no idea. Not that it was a secret, but that it meant things were still going well. We want to know that we had an issue and we were able to remedy it. We want to know that you had a need and you called us and we were there. We want to know that you had a struggle and we were able to provide the solution because we had you wrist to wrist. And all of the staff that are here, I talked last year about how they're remarkable people and how blessed I am to be able to work with them on a daily basis. I stand by that sentiment. remarkable people that all have you wrist to wrist. I did say that life is a series of opportunities, and I had a member ask me a very interesting question last week, I think it was. They said they were excited to come this week and were looking forward to my presentation. And then they asked me a question that, no, John didn't know they asked me, which was, am I going to get to see your girls? Life is a series of opportunities. It's what we do with them. So speaking of opportunities, Tammy Sue's still putting up with me. She's doing awesome. Scarlett is now 7, 2nd grade. That's us parasailing back in June. Yeah, pray for me. She's 13. 13 and almost halftime of a soccer game right now. So Morgan is in 8th grade. And I saved a big old space on the other side, not because I'm going to put a picture of me, but I couldn't resist putting that one up there. I'm going to let you all guess which one has the sass in the family. I'm also going to let you guess who applied her sunscreen that day. So yes, the girls are doing great. You all do ask often, and I'm never, ever, ever going to pass up an opportunity to have a proud daddy moment, because they're why I do what I do. And so, yeah, when I was asked about it, absolutely, I'm going to put a slide in there. So as I try to land this plane, I want to just mention or key you in on a little bit of what's next. Though we did emerge stronger, as we intended to, we're still evolving. We're still working. There's still a lot going on behind the curtain. We've still got a lot of really cool things that are coming out for you very soon, and some that are bigger picture that are going to take a couple of years to develop. But as it was put just before the meeting out in the hall, there is not a whole lot of getting bored around Volcor right now. We got a lot happening, and it's exciting. So we want to aim to move forward to ensure your success, because that's Volcor's calling. We recognize we are only a success in the moment when we do something successful. Then we have to do it again, and again, and again. Every day is a series of opportunities to earn your trust for tomorrow. There's no guarantees. Capital doesn't mean you have to do business with us. Because something worked out well last year doesn't mean you have to do business with us. We have today to earn it tomorrow. That's not lost on us. If hard times come upon your shop or the industry, we'll look to our calling to do the next right thing to support your mission. And you can rest assured, Volcor won't be there with a fist bump, and certainly not with a foot tap, but rather wrist to wrist, helping you up and offering hope so that you can do the same for your members, because that's what makes us different. That's what makes us exporters of hope. That's what makes us Volcor. That's what makes us a credit union. We love you. We love serving you. And I just thank you for your time. God bless.